There are moments in life that mark us forever, whispers of destiny that change our path when we least expect it. The story I'm going to tell you today could be that of your neighbor, your grandmother, or even your own. Are you ready to hear this story? My husband died and my daughter inherited the mansion and $5 million. I was left with just an old farmhouse. Then she threw me out of her home, yelling, "Go live in that dump, you useless old woman." What I discovered later in that farmhouse left her in shock. I was 62 years old when my life fell apart. I always thought I knew my family, that love meant something in this world, until Richard, my husband of 40 years, died, suddenly, of a heart attack. I never imagined his death would reveal such painful truths about the people I loved most. The reading of the will took place in the elegant office of Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged attorney, with an impassive expression. I sat with trembling hands while my daughter Jessica, dressed in an expensive black suit, remained by my side with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "I will now proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Anderson," began Mr. Thompson, adjusting his glasses. My heart was pounding. Richard and I had built a life together from nothing. Our beautiful home in Westchester County, our investments, everything had been the fruit of our joint efforts. "To my dear wife, Martha Anderson," read the attorney, and I straightened up. "I leave the old family farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, with all its contents and the surrounding land." I frowned in confusion. The old farmhouse? It was a property Richard had inherited from his parents, abandoned for decades. It was in ruins the last time we visited, about 15 years ago. "To my beloved daughter Jessica," continued the attorney, "I leave the family residence in Westchester, all bank accounts, investments, and the total sum of $5 million. The world stopped around me. The house where I had lived for 4 decades. Everything we had built together. Jessica was receiving everything. And I just an old farmhouse in ruins? There must be some mistake," I murmured, my voice barely audible. Jessica turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's no mistake, Mom. Dad knew what he was doing." The attorney looked at me with something resembling compassion. "The terms are very clear, Mrs. Anderson. Your husband was very specific about his wishes." We left the office in silence. The April sun seemed too bright, almost cruel in its indifference. During the ride back home, Jessica didn't say a word, but I could feel her satisfaction emanating like heat from an oven. That night, as I prepared dinner as I had done for decades, Jessica finally spoke. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation." I set the knife down on the cutting board. "What situation?" "Well, this is my house now, and frankly, I think it's time you had your own space." I stared at her, waiting for some sign that she was joking. "Jessica, this has been my home for 40 years. This is where I raised a family with your father. Dad isn't here anymore," she said coldly. "And this house is mine now. You have the farmhouse." "The farmhouse doesn't even have electricity, Jessica. No running water. The roof is falling in." She shrugged, as if my problems were insignificant. "Then you'll have to fix it up. I don't want this to get unpleasant. I'm giving you 1 week to pack your things." I felt like I had been slapped. 1 week? 1 week," she repeated, and then added with an icy smile. "Consider this an opportunity for independence, Mom. You always said you wanted more time for yourself." The following days were a whirlwind of confusion and pain. I packed my personal belongings, family photographs, clothes that fit into 2 suitcases. Jessica watched over everything like a hawk, making sure I didn't take anything she considered valuable. "Not that," she said when I tried to take the porcelain set my mother had given me. "That comes with the house. It was my mother's, Jessica. It's part of my heritage." On the last day, as I loaded my suitcases into my old Honda Civic, Jessica came out of the house. She was wearing a new designer dress and jewelry I didn't recognize. "I hope you understand this isn't personal, Mom," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Dad obviously had his reasons for doing this." "And what do you think those reasons were?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Jessica approached me, and for a moment, I thought maybe she would finally show some compassion. Instead, her expression hardened. Maybe because he finally realized you were always a burden, always depending on him, never really contributing. Maybe he wanted to make sure that I, who actually made something of my life, got what I deserved. Her words hit me like bullets. Jessica, I sacrificed my career to raise you. I left my job as a teacher because you and your father wanted me to. Nobody forced you to do anything, Mom. Those were your choices. I got into the car with shaking hands. Jessica remained in the driveway, watching as I drove away from the only home I had known as an adult. When I arrived at the farmhouse, the sun was setting. The structure looked even worse than I remembered. Peeling paint, broken windows, and the porch steps creaked dangerously under my feet. But it was all I had. That first night, lying on the floor on an old blanket, looking at the stars through a hole in the roof, I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Not just for the loss of my home, but for the loss of the daughter I thought I knew. How had it come to this? How had the child I raised, whom I had loved unconditionally, become someone so cruel? But as the tears dried on my cheeks and the silence of the countryside surrounded me, a small spark of something ignited in my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was determination. If Jessica thought I would give up, that I would break, she was very wrong. She had no idea what awaited me in that old and apparently useless farmhouse. She had no idea that my life was about to change forever. The first days at the farmhouse were the hardest of my life. Without electricity, I depended on candles and an old flashlight I found in a dusty drawer. Without running water, I had to walk half a mile to a well that still worked, carrying buckets that seemed to get heavier each day. My hands, accustomed to the comfort of suburban life, became covered with blisters and cuts. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain. On the third day, my sister Linda called me. Her voice sounded strange, distant. "Martha, is what Jessica says true?" "What is she saying?" I asked, although part of me already knew. "She says you attacked the attorney when the will was read, that you screamed and made a scene because they didn't leave you all the money." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "Linda, that's completely false. I never." "She also says you've been harassing her, demanding money, threatening to hire a lawyer to contest the will." "That's a lie." My voice broke. "Linda, I'm your sister. You know me better than that." There was a long and painful pause. "I don't know what to think, Martha." Jessica seemed very upset when she called me. She said she was afraid of you. After hanging up, I sat on the rotting wooden floor of the farmhouse and cried until I had no tool left. Jessica had not only taken away my home, but was systematically destroying all my other relationships as well. The next day, my sister-in-law, Patricia, canceled our tradition of Friday lunches. "I think it's better if you take some time for yourself, Martha, to reflect on things." Then it was my cousin Sarah, who had been like a sister to me. "Jessica says you've been drinking heavily since Richard died. Maybe you should seek help." Each phone call was a stab in the heart. Jessica had carefully constructed a narrative where I was the villain, the greedy and desperate widow who couldn't accept that her own husband hadn't trusted her with his fortune. A week after I moved to the farmhouse, Jessica appeared at my door. She arrived in a new BMW, bright red, wearing a coat that probably cost more than my car. "Hello, Mom," she said with a fake smile. "I came to see how you're adjusting." I looked at her through the broken screen door, trying to process her presence. "What do you want, Jessica?" "Can't I visit my mother?" She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Wow, this place really is a disaster, isn't it? Look at those broken windows and that roof. My God, are you really living here?" "I don't have a choice." "Well, I guess you'll have to make it work." She came closer and lowered her voice. "You know, Mom, I've been talking with the family about you." My stomach sank. "What have you been telling them?" "Just the truth. That you've been very bitter since the reading of the will. That you can't accept Dad's decisions. That you've been making very unpleasant comments about me." "Jessica, that's not true and you know it." She shrugged. Perception is reality, Mom. And the perception is that you're not handling grief well. Then she turned and began walking back to her car, but stopped and looked at me over her shoulder. Oh, and Mom, Linda mentioned that you might try to contest the will. Just so you know, Dad worked with the best lawyer in New York. Everything is legally airtight. If you try anything, you'll just end up wasting what little money you have. After she left, I stood in that broken doorway for a long time, watching her car disappear down the dirt road. The reality of my situation hit me like an avalanche. I had not only lost my home and my family, but Jessica had systematically destroyed my reputation. That night, as I tried to repair one of the broken windows with duct tape and cardboard, I reflected on the last 40 years. Had I really been such a bad mother, such a bad wife? I remembered when Jessica was 8 and fell ill with pneumonia. I spent 3 consecutive nights in the hospital, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, holding her hand. I remembered all the school plays I attended, all the science projects I helped create, all the nights I stayed up waiting for her to come home when she was a teenager. I remembered when Richard lost his job in 2008, and I went back to work as a teacher to keep the family afloat. I remembered how I left that job when he found a better one, because he said it was important for someone to be home for Jessica. Had those things meant anything to him? Had they meant anything to Jessica? Apparently not. 2 weeks after I moved in, my closest neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, came to visit me. He was an older man who had known Richard for years. "Martha," he said, taking off his cap, "I'm very sorry about Richard, and I'm even more sorry about what's happening to you." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I've lived here for 40 years, he continued, and I know the value of this land. Your husband was a smart man, very smart. I didn't understand what he meant at that moment, but his words stayed with me. By the end of my second month at the farmhouse, I had lost 15 pounds. My hands were calloused and rough. My hair had lost its shine, and new wrinkles had appeared around my eyes. But there was something else, a hardness in my spirit, that wasn't there before. One morning, while sweeping debris from the porch, I found a loose board. Lifting it, I discovered a small hidden compartment under the floor. Inside was a thick envelope and a metal box. With trembling hands, I carried the objects inside and opened them under the light that came in through a broken window. The envelope contained legal documents that I didn't understand at first. Property deeds, topographical maps, and papers with official seals. But as I read more carefully, I began to comprehend what I had in my hands. They were property appraisals, soil analyses, and most surprisingly, a geological survey confirming the existence of significant oil and natural gas deposits on the property. There were also documents certifying the exceptional quality of the land for agriculture. But what took my breath away was the last page, a purchase offer from an energy company for the mineral rights to the land. The offer had been made 3 months before Richard died, but according to a handwritten note in the margin, he had rejected it. "I'll wait for the right time," he had written in his familiar handwriting. With hands that were shaking violently, I opened the metal box. Inside was a sealed letter with my name written in Richard's handwriting. "My dear Martha," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you found what I left for you. I hope Jessica hasn't been too cruel. But knowing her nature, she probably has been." I had to stop reading to dry the tears that had begun to fall onto the paper. "I know you'll wonder why I did things this way," the letter continued. "Why did I give the house and money to Jessica, while leaving you this farmhouse that seems worthless? The answer is simple. I know you, Martha. I know your strength, your resilience, your ability to survive and thrive even in the most difficult circumstances. Jessica never had to fight for anything. We gave her everything on a silver platter, and I'm afraid that turned her into someone I don't recognize. Someone greedy, manipulative, with no real compassion for others. If I had left everything to you directly, she would have found a way to take it from you, legally or illegally." My breathing was irregular as I continued reading. "But you, my love, have something Jessica will never have. True inner strength. I knew that if anyone could survive in this farmhouse long enough to find this treasure, it would be you. Consider it a final test, one that Jessica would never have passed. This land, with its mineral deposits and agricultural potential, is worth much more than the house and money I left to Jessica. But more than that, it's your freedom, your independence, your opportunity to live the rest of your life on your own terms, without depending on anyone. There are more documents at the bank, in a safety deposit box, registered under your name. The number is on the back of this letter. Use it wisely. I loved you during all our years together, Martha. I'm sorry for putting you through this test, but I knew you were strong enough to overcome it. Now live. Live for both of us. At the end of the letter was a number. I sat on the floor of the farmhouse for a long time, reading and rereading the letter. Richard had orchestrated all of this. The will that seemed so cruel, so unfair, had actually been his way of protecting me from Jessica and at the same time, giving me something she could never touch. But there was something more in his words that made me feel a mixture of love and pain. He had known me well enough to know I would survive this test, but he had also known Jessica well enough to know she would betray me. How long had he known our daughter was capable of such cruelty? That night, for the first time in months, I didn't feel desperate. I didn't feel abandoned or betrayed. I felt something I had forgotten how to feel. Power. Jessica thought she had destroyed me. She thought she had won, that she had finally gotten rid of the mother she considered a burden. But she had no idea what I had really inherited. She had no idea that her cruelty had been exactly the test that Richard expected her to fail. The next day I drove to the bank in town. Safety deposit box 24/7 contained even more documents, including updated reports on the value of the land and correspondence with 3 different companies, all interested in the property. The most recent offer, dated a week before Richard's death, was for $12 million. As I drove back to the farmhouse, I couldn't stop thinking about Jessica. Probably in the house that used to be mine, spending the money she thought was her big victory. She didn't know that her mother, the woman she had treated like garbage, had just become a millionaire. But it wasn't yet time for the revelation. First, I had to decide exactly how I wanted to use this new power. One thing was certain: Jessica had seriously underestimated the woman who had raised her. The following days were a whirlwind of silent investigation. I had decided not to do anything precipitous. Richard had been meticulous in his planning, and I would be just as careful in the execution. First, I contacted a different lawyer, one who was in the neighboring town and didn't know Jessica. Mr. Davis was an older man, specializing in property rights and mineral transactions. When I showed him the documents, his eyes lit up with professional interest. "Mrs. Anderson," he told me, adjusting his glasses to better examine the papers, "this is extraordinary. Your husband had impeccable documentation here. These rights are legitimate and completely separate from any other inheritance." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that although your daughter inherited the house and money, this property is completely independent. It's specifically in your name and cannot be contested or claimed by anyone else." I felt a wave of relief. "And the offers from the companies?" Davis smiled. "Very legitimate. In fact, I know 2 of these companies. They have excellent reputations. But Mrs. Anderson, before making any decision, I would recommend getting an independent evaluation. The value of oil and natural gas rights has increased significantly in recent years." Following his advice, I hired an independent geologist to do his own assessment of the property. Dr. Wilson was a man in his 50s with a gray beard and eyes that sparkled with enthusiasm when he talked about rocks and minerals. For 3 days I watched him walk around my property with strange equipment, taking samples, making measurements. I continued with my daily routine, maintaining the facade of the abandoned woman struggling to survive in a ruined farmhouse. Meanwhile, I began to observe Jessica's behavior more closely. It wasn't difficult to get information about her in a small town. People talked, especially at the post office and at the supermarket. What I heard surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "That Jessica Anderson is spending money like there's no tomorrow," murmured Mrs. Wilson in the supermarket line. "She's bought 3 cars in the last month. And that trip to Paris she's planning," added her friend. 2 months in the best hotels, it must be costing a fortune. My niece works at the jewelry store downtown, continued Mrs. Wilson. She says Jessica has been there 4 times buying necklaces and bracelets that cost more than my annual salary. I listened to these conversations with growing fascination. Jessica was doing exactly what Richard had predicted, squandering the money without any consideration for the future. A week later, Dr. Wilson gave me his report. His smile was even wider than before. Mrs. Anderson, your property is literally a treasure. The oil and gas deposits are extensive and of high quality, but that's not the most exciting part. What else did you find? The land is perfect for sustainable agriculture. Soil analyses suggest that with proper irrigation, it could support a variety of high-value crops, and there's enough groundwater to sustain significant farming and still sell water rights to neighboring properties. I didn't know much about agriculture or mineral rights, but Dr. Wilson's expression told me this was good. Very good. What kind of value are we talking about? I asked. Conservatively, I'd say the mineral rights alone could be worth between $15 and $20 million, possibly more with a good development plan. $20 million, 4 times more than what Jessica had inherited, and that was being conservative. That night, as I ate my simple dinner by candlelight, I couldn't help but smile. Richard had known exactly what he was doing. He had turned my apparent humiliation into the greatest victory of my life. But my investigation didn't stop there. I began to pay more attention to Jessica's activities, not out of spite, but from strategic curiosity. One afternoon, while I was at the bank doing some minor transactions, I overheard a very interesting conversation. Jessica was at the teller next to mine, and her voice was loud enough that it was impossible not to hear. I need to transfer another $50,000 to my investment account, she was telling the teller. And I also need information about loans against my inheritance. I have some big expenses coming up. Loans against her inheritance. That meant she was already spending more money than she had immediately available. After she left, I waited a few minutes before approaching the same teller. He was young, probably new to the job, and seemed a little overwhelmed. "Excuse me," I said with my most maternal voice, "but the woman who just left, is she Jessica Anderson? I think she might be a relative of mine." "Oh yes, Mrs. Anderson has been very busy lately with all her transactions." "Transactions?" "Well, I shouldn't talk about other clients' affairs," he said, but then leaned forward as if he were about to share some juicy gossip. "But between you and me, I've never seen anyone spend money so quickly. Large withdrawals almost every day." This was valuable information. Jessica wasn't just spending Richard's money. She was spending it at an unsustainable rate. A few nights later, while reviewing Richard's documents for the umpteenth time, I found something I had overlooked before, a small note written in the margin of one of the oldest reports. Jessica never had patience for the things that really matter. She always wanted immediate gratification. Martha, on the other hand, understands the value of waiting for the right moment. Richard had understood our daughter better than I thought. He had seen her impulsive nature, her need to have everything immediately, and he had used that weakness against her. The next day I decided to make a small visit to town. It had been weeks since I had left the property, except for essentials. But now, I was curious to see how Jessica was handling her new wealth. I found her in the most expensive clothing store in town, trying on a coat that probably cost more than what I had spent on clothes in the last 5 years. "What do you think of this one?" she was asking the saleswoman, twirling in front of the mirror. "It's for my trip to Aspen next month." "You look beautiful in it, Mrs. Anderson," replied the saleswoman, "and we have shoes that match perfectly." From my position behind a scarf rack, I could observe Jessica without being seen. Her behavior was revealing. She was compulsively buying, choosing the most expensive items without even asking the price. It was as if she were trying to compensate for something, as if money could fill a void she didn't even know she had. When she left the store with 3 large bags, I followed her at a discreet distance. Her next stop was the travel agency. where she spent more than an hour planning what appeared to be a very extravagant vacation. After that, she went to a real estate agent's office. Through the window, I could see her looking at brochures for houses in the Hamptons that were clearly beyond her reach, even with her inheritance. It was fascinating and sad at the same time. Jessica was acting exactly like a person who had won the lottery and had no idea how to handle sudden wealth. She was making impulsive decisions that would lead her to financial ruin in a few years. That night, back at my farmhouse, I made some basic calculations based on what I had observed and heard. Jessica was spending approximately $100,000 a month. At that rate, her $5 million would last less than 5 years, and that was without counting the interest she was probably accumulating on loans. Richard had been right. Jessica didn't have the discipline or wisdom to handle true wealth. But I did. As the candles flickered around me and the countryside whispered in the darkness, I made a decision. It was time to start converting my property into reality. But I would do it my way, on my terms, and when the time was right, Jessica would have her surprise, but first she would have her fall. 6 months after moving to the farmhouse, my life had changed in ways I could never have imagined. I had sold the mineral rights to the most reputable energy company for $15 million after careful negotiation that also assured me future royalties. In addition, I had begun a modest sustainable farming venture that promised to be very profitable in the long term. But I kept my life simple, at least in appearance. I still lived in the farmhouse, though now I had electricity and running water discreetly installed. On the outside, the place still looked deteriorated, exactly as Jessica expected it to be. But inside I had made subtle but significant improvements for my comfort. My lawyer, Mr. Davis, had structured everything so that the money was completely protected and diversified. I had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, and much more. But more important than the money was the sense of control I had regained over my own existence. Meanwhile, I had been observing the predictable progression of Jessica's life. My sources of information in town had become more reliable as people began to see me with sympathy. The poor older woman abandoned by her cruel daughter. What I heard was exactly what I had expected. But still, I was surprised by the speed of Jessica's fall. She sold 2 of the 3 cars she bought, Mrs. Wilson informed me during one of our casual encounters at the supermarket, and canceled that trip to Aspen she had planned. Really? I asked, feigning surprise. My brother-in-law works at the bank. He says Jessica has been there almost every day trying to get more loans. Apparently she already owes more than $300,000. $300,000 in debt in just 6 months. Jessica's rate of self-destruction was even faster than I had calculated. But what really confirmed to me that her world was crumbling was when I saw her at the pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked different. Her hair, which she had always kept perfectly groomed, was unkempt. Her clothes, though still expensive, looked wrinkled, but the most revealing were her eyes. They had the desperate look of someone who was finally realizing the consequences of their actions. She was buying anxiety medication and sleeping pills, speaking in a low but urgent voice with the pharmacist about whether her insurance would cover the cost. That night, as I ate dinner in my now comfortable farmhouse, I received the call I had been expecting. "Mom?" Jessica's voice sounded small, vulnerable, in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Hello, Jessica. Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come see you?" I looked out the window into the darkness of the countryside, feeling a strange calm. "Of course. When?" "Now. It's urgent." "All right, you know where to find me." An hour later, I heard the familiar sound of her car approaching on the dirt road. But when I went out to the porch, I saw that it was no longer the bright red BMW. It was a used sedan, probably 10 years old. Jessica got out of the car slowly, as if each movement cost her an effort. When she approached the porch light, I could see she had been crying. "Mom," she began, her voice breaking, "I've made terrible mistakes." I didn't respond immediately. I just stood there observing her, remembering all the times she had come to me with problems when she was younger, and how those visits had completely ceased when she went to college and decided she no longer needed me. "Would you like to come in?" I finally asked. She nodded, and I led her inside the farmhouse. I had prepared tea as if I had known this conversation was coming. Jessica sat in the chair I had put out for visitors, looking around with eyes that seemed to see the place for the first time. "It's really not as bad as I thought," she murmured. "You've made improvements." "I've done what I could." She remained silent for a long moment, twisting her hands in her lap. Finally she looked up at me. "Mom, I'm in trouble. Serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Money. I owe, I owe a lot of money, more than I can pay." "How much?" $500,000. Her voice was barely a whisper. I thought I had more time. I thought Dad's money would last forever. But I made stupid investments. I spent without thinking. I looked at her, this woman, who had been my baby, my little girl, and who had become someone I barely recognized. But now, sitting in my humble farmhouse, stripped of all her previous arrogance, I could see a glimmer of the girl she used to be. "And what do you want me to do?" I asked softly. "I need your help, Mom. I know I don't deserve it. I know I was horrible to you, but you're the only family I have." Tears began to fall down her cheeks, and for a moment my heart softened. This was my daughter, after all. The child I had raised, whom I had loved unconditionally, no matter how much pain she had caused me. "Jessica," I said calmly, "6 months ago you told me to go live in this dump. You called me a useless old woman, you humiliated me in the shadow of your dead father, and you threw me out of the only home I had known as a home." "I know, Mom, I know. And I'm so sorry. You took away my family photographs, my clothes, even my mother's china. You said I had never contributed anything, that I had always been a burden." Each word I said was like a slap to her. I could see it in her face, the way she winced with each reminder of her cruelty. "And now," I continued, "you come here to this farmhouse that you considered unworthy of you, asking me for help. Tell me, Jessica, what has changed? Am I suddenly a good mother because you need money?" "No, Mom. It's not that. I've realized what I did. I've had time to think, to see how I treated the only person who always loved me unconditionally." Her words sounded sincere, and part of me wanted to believe them. But another part, the part that had suffered in silence for months, that had been humiliated and abandoned, remembered the pain all too well. "Do you know what I've learned living here, Jessica?" I asked her. "I've learned that I can survive without you. I've learned that I don't need anyone's approval to have value. I've learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who deserve it the least." "Mom, please, I'll pay you back. When I solve my financial problems, I'll pay you back everything you lend me, with interest." "With what money will you pay me back, Jessica? From what I've heard, you've spent almost all of your inheritance. What makes you think you'll be able to pay back debts of 5?" She remained silent because we both knew she had no answer. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. For months I had imagined this moment. I had fantasized about the day when Jessica would come crawling back, asking for help. In my fantasies, I had been harsh, ruthless, giving her a taste of her own medicine. But now that she was here, seeing her truly broken and desperate, my feelings were more complicated than I had expected. "Mom," her voice was pleading, "I know now that I have no right to ask you for anything, but if I don't get this money, I'm going to lose everything. The house, my job at the law firm, everything." I turned to look at her. "And why should I care about that, Jessica? When you had everything and I had nothing, did you care about my well-being?" "No," she whispered, "and I hate myself for that." The moment of truth had arrived, the moment when I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. I could be like Jessica had been to me, cruel, ruthless, without compassion. Or I could be the person that Richard had seen in me, strong, but also capable of mercy when it was deserved. "Jessica," I said finally, "I'm going to make you an offer. One offer." Her eyes lit up with desperate hope. "I'll help you with your debts. but not as a gift, as a loan, with very specific terms. Anything, Mom. I'll accept any terms. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. You haven't heard the terms yet. I sat down across from Jessica, watching as she waited for my terms with a mixture of hope and terror in her eyes. For months I had imagined this moment, and now that it was here, I felt a deep calm that I hadn't experienced in years. These are my terms, I began, my voice firm and clear. I'll lend you $600,000 to cover your debts and give you a small margin to start over. Mom, that's more than I expected. I raised a hand to silence her. I'm not finished. The loan will be at 5% annual interest, to be paid over 10 years. That's more generous than any bank. She nodded eagerly. I accept, of course I accept. But there are more conditions. For the next 5 years, you will work for me. You will come here every Saturday and help me with the maintenance of the property, cleaning, whatever I need, without complaints, without excuses. I saw her face change slightly, but she nodded. Okay. And every time you come, you will speak to me with respect. None of the derogatory or condescending comments you've become accustomed to. You will treat me like the mother I've always been, not like the burden you decided I was. Yes, Mom. Finally, I said, standing up and walking to my desk. I want you to write a letter. A complete apology for everything you did to me. Not for me, but for your own growth. And I want you to read it aloud to the entire family at the next Christmas gathering. Jessica paled. Mom, that's humiliating. Humiliating? I looked directly into her eyes. Do you find it humiliating to have to apologize for humiliating your own mother? For throwing me out of my home and spreading lies about me to the entire family? She lowered her gaze in shame. No, you're right. I'll do it. Good. Then we have an agreement. The next day, I transferred the money to her account. Seeing her relief when she was able to pay her debts gave me a strange satisfaction. Not because I enjoyed humiliating her, but because I had taken complete control of the situation. The first Saturday she came to work, she arrived dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, something I hadn't seen her wear in years. Without her expensive clothes and her arrogant attitude, she looked more like the daughter I remembered from decades ago. What do you need me to do? She asked, her tone respectful for the first time in years. I need you to help clean out the back shed. I'm reorganizing some things. We worked in silence for the first hour. I could see she was struggling with the manual labor, her soft hands unaccustomed to physical work. But she didn't complain. Mom, she finally said, as we moved some old boxes. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you get the money to lend me? I don't understand how you could have saved so much being poor? I finished for her. She blushed. I didn't mean it like that. I smiled, but it wasn't cruel this time. Jessica, there are many things about me you never knew. Many things you never bothered to ask about. That afternoon, after she left, I sat on my renovated porch, drinking tea and looking out at the fields that I now knew contained my fortune. The newly planted organic garden whispered in the late breeze, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. The following months established a routine. Jessica came every Saturday, worked without complaints, and gradually we began to have real conversations. Not the superficial interactions of past years, but honest conversations about life, about mistakes, about what really mattered. One fall Saturday, as we were harvesting vegetables from the garden I had started, she surprised me with a direct question. Will you ever really forgive me, Mom? I paused, leaning on my harvesting basket. Jessica, forgiveness isn't something I grant or withhold, like a prize. It's something that happens naturally when I see real changes. And have you seen them? Real changes? I looked at her, this 35-year-old woman, who had rediscovered humility in the hardest way. Yes, I've seen them, but more importantly, I think you've seen them too. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I'm so ashamed of the person I was. Don't be ashamed of the past, Jessica. Use it to be better in the future. Christmas came, and with it the first family gathering since my exile. Jessica had kept her promise and written a complete letter, apologizing not just to me, but to the entire family for the lies she had spread about me. When she read it aloud in my sister Linda's living room, with the entire family present, the silence was absolute. I could see tears in the eyes of several relatives who had believed her stories and turned their backs on me. "Mom," Jessica concluded, looking directly at me, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday I can earn it." After dinner, Linda approached me, her eyes full of remorse. "Martha, I can't believe we were so gullible. We should have known you better." "People believe what they want to believe," I responded simply. "But what matters is that now they know the truth." That spring, exactly 1 year after finding the documents in the farmhouse, I made an important decision. It was time to reveal my true situation, but I would do it my way. I bought a beautiful house in the hills overlooking the valley near the town where I had grown up. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was elegant, comfortable, and completely mine. When Jessica arrived for her usual Saturday of work and found the farmhouse empty, with a note directing her to my new address, her shock was complete. "Mom," she said, when she arrived at my new house, "what is all this?" "It's my home," I answered simply. "My real home." "But how?" "The money you lent me, your financial situation." I smiled, inviting her into the spacious kitchen where I had prepared tea. "Jessica, remember the farmhouse you thought was worthless?" "Yes. It turns out that your father knew something that neither you nor I knew at first. That land contained valuable oil and gas deposits, and had exceptional potential for sustainable agriculture." I watched her process this information, saw her expression change from confusion to understanding, and then to something I can only describe as awe mixed with respect. "You mean Dad knew? Your father knew exactly what he was doing. He knew you would waste the liquid cash, but that I would have the patience and wisdom to discover the true treasure he had left me." Jessica remained silent for a long time. Finally, she looked up at me. "So, you never needed my money. You could have let me suffer the consequences of my actions." "Yes, I could have." "Why didn't you?" I moved closer to her and placed my hand over hers. "Because despite everything that happened, you're still my daughter, and because I believed that the person you used to be still existed somewhere inside you." Tears began to fall down her cheeks. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," I said softly, "but a mother's love isn't always based on what's deserved." That summer, Jessica finished paying off her loan, 3 years ahead of schedule. She had rebuilt her career with a completely different focus, specializing in helping families in financial crisis. She said it was her way of giving back. "Mom," she said to me one Saturday, as we worked together in my new garden, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad had divided everything equally from the beginning?" I thought about her question as I planted roses along the entrance path. "I think your father knew us better than we knew ourselves," I finally replied. "He knew I needed to learn that I could survive on my own, and he knew you needed to learn that money without wisdom is useless." "And do you think we learned?" I looked at my daughter, no longer the arrogant and cruel woman she had been, but someone who had discovered humility and gratitude in the hardest way. I thought about my own journey, from the devastated woman who had been thrown out of her home, to the independent and prosperous woman I was now. "Yes," I said, smiling as the afternoon sun bathed my garden in golden light. "I think we finally learned." That night, as I sat on my terrace watching the lights of the valley below, I reflected on the extraordinary year I had experienced. I had lost a family that took me for granted and gained the respect of a daughter who had learned to value me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jessica. "Mom, I just wanted to say good night. And thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see myself." After hanging up, I sat in the stillness of the night, feeling more complete than I had felt in years. Richard had been right. I was stronger than anyone had thought, including myself. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't getting what you want, but discovering that you already had everything you needed to be happy. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.